Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we're going to talk about the air conditioning on board the ship, what they had, and when they got it. So, we are in one of the earliest spaces that ever received air conditioning on Battleship New Jersey. This is one of the 16-inch powder magazines. This particular magazine feeds turret 1. We are down on 5th deck right now, which means that likely sometime in 1940 or 1941, before the ship is even launched, as this space is being completed, they're installing some of the earliest air conditioning on Battleship New Jersey. Especially during World War II, when air conditioning wasn't common in the household, and when the US military is still operating with an all-draft military, and so they don't have the same quality of life considerations that an all-volunteer military has. It was very common for ships to not have air conditioning at all in most of their spaces, including habitable spaces like offices, workspaces, and berthing compartments. We'll talk about the sorts of ventilation that they did have, but there were a handful of spaces on World War II era ships that were still air conditioned from day one. And this 16-inch magazine is one of them. High temperatures make the propellant unstable. And if it gets too hot in the magazine, one of two things will happen. One, the powder will become too humid, too damp, it'll never function. Or two, it will spontaneously combust. And this was a thing that happened a number of times on some of the resupplying barges, on some of the older pre-dreadnought type battleships that didn't have good climate control and had even more unstable propellant. The powder was known to cook off, and in some cases, when one bag cooks off, it's able to detonate other bags, and this can even destroy the ship. French Poudre B is notorious for that. I believe the British had a situation where that happened. It could have even played a role in the loss of USS Maine in Havana, Cuba. So, by the time New Jersey, the last class of completed American battleship, comes around, they've sort of figured out this problem and how to deal with it. And the solution is a chilled water radiator system. So, much like the radiator systems on the ship that produce heat, just taking steam from the boilers and piping it through a radiator which acts as a heat exchanger, putting that heat into the room, the chilled water radiators that I have right here are exactly the same. They've got an insulated pipe that's bringing cold water into the radiator coils. This one's going in. That's then using the coils as a heat exchanger to chill off the room. And then the now warmer water is going back over to the chillers to get cooled again. These sorts of chilled water radiator systems would have been in just about all of the magazines. They still exist for the 16-inch guns, for the 5-inch guns, and for the spaces that now serve as magazines for the 20-millimeter phalanxes. However, it seems like their quality definitely varied depending on the type of magazine. So the ones for the 16-inch magazines seem to have had the best output because we've got some of the temperature logs, and they seem to show the lowest temperatures in the 16-inch magazines, followed by the 5-inch magazines. And the 40-millimeter magazines, the small arms lockers, the stuff for the 20 millimeters, seem to have less refrigeration than these other spaces. And part of that might be that they keep adding 40-millimeter and 20-millimeter guns on, so they keep just like throwing magazines in under them. It's not part of the original design, so the system just might not be as efficient as the original design stuff. Like, they never really moved the 16-inch magazines. But it could also have to do with, the 16-inch guns have a tremendous amount of propellant, and it's enough in each individual magazine to cause a detonation that could destroy the vessel. Not so for the 40-millimeter magazines. During the 1940s and 50s, these were not the only spaces that were air-conditioned, however. Electronic equipment such as radios and radars, especially with cathode ray tubes, were notorious for putting off heat and needed to be relatively cool to operate. And so spaces like the radio transmitting room, the radio room, and CIC and other associated radar spaces, the flag radar plot, all would have had some sort of air conditioning system. We're not entirely sure what that would have looked like on New Jersey, because those original systems, unlike the chilled water radiator systems, have since been removed for much more modern air handling units that all date to the 1980s, on this ship at least. So during World War II, the ship's operating in the South Pacific. What sort of climate control can the crew count on? Really, forced draft ventilation is the only thing. There are two types of ventilation ducts that show up on the main deck. There are mushroom-shaped ones that sort of have a stem or a stalk and then branch out like that. Those are drawing air in to ventilate spaces. And then there are stool-shaped ones that are just a straight stalk, essentially. And those are drawing air from in the spaces back out. So that's pretty much it. You've got natural ventilation, and that's pretty much the best you get. If you have a bunk that's near one of the outlets for those ventilators, it's usually not too bad. The moving air really helps. Otherwise, it's kind of warm. And the South Pacific sun heating up a steel box that at this point is painted navy blue, so really absorbing the heat, isn't all that great. The fortunate thing is the battleship's primarily operating around the equator, and all these equatorial islands that we're invading, or near equatorial islands, tend to have fairly consistent temperatures year-round. We've got some of the temperature logs for the ship, and they show pretty consistently 85 to 87 degrees. So it was actually cooler in the South Pacific during these World War II deployments than it gets in Camden in the summer right now, because our temperature fluctuates and we got a cold winter and a summer where, like days like today, the temperature's in the high 90s. Which isn't to say that the temperature doesn't get to that level in the South Pacific, but it seemed to have pretty consistently been in the 80s. So the ship's climate control systems remain relatively similar through the 1940s and 50s, and it isn't until New Jersey is reactivated in 1968 that she starts to get some of the modern air conditioning systems.
And now, with their expertise and strength, they come on board again to graft their wondrous computers, sophisticated communications, modern lighting and air conditioning onto the complex structure and organs of the battleship.
Air conditioning systems start to get installed on Navy ships as early as the early 50s. And you have ships like the Des Moines-class cruisers that get some really early era air conditioning units installed. In fact, it's been reported that Newport News was the one that was kept in service longer than Salem and Des Moines because her air conditioning system was better than the other two. And so that sort of serves as a framework for air conditioning in other ships going forward. By the 1960s, the Navy is starting to install that in ships. Because people are able to get this at home, this amenity, it becomes more and more common throughout the fleet as well. And so when New Jersey's reactivated, they start to install air conditioning systems. In addition to the air handlers installed on the ship, the crew also installs like window mount units in places, and sometimes they even cut through otherwise watertight bulkheads to mount these. It seems like the air handlers that were installed were not all that effective off the coast of Vietnam, and so the crew starts to buy window mount units and install them and just cut through the bulkhead of their berthing compartment or workshop into whatever workshop is behind them, so they're venting their hot air into some other space. And it really seems like it was the Wild West in terms of doing those sorts of unauthorized ship-alts. By the 1980s, with an all-volunteer military, one of the main habitability upgrades that the ship gets during reactivation is the installation of new air handling units throughout the vessel. And these are relatively efficient, and we continue to use them today. While we're not using the same air conditioning equipment down below that's providing the chilled water to the air handlers, we've got a modern tower unit in that does that, or at least it was modern 20-some years ago when we installed it. The original air handlers that are actually pushing the chilled water through the ship and pushing air through the ship, original to 1982, are the ones that we still use. And that's one of the key things we look at when we go to strip parts off of ships at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, is getting pieces for these air handlers to keep using, because we've already stripped the ones that are in spaces not on the tour routes to continue to feed the ones on the tour routes. By the 1980s, just about every space on the ship is air conditioned. You still have chilled water systems in spaces like these. The best climate controlled spaces are spaces like the IC switch room, internal communications electronics, and the Combat Engagement Center, CEC, with the fire control computers. But most berthing compartments, workshops, and offices have air conditioning at this point. The handful of spaces that do not are spaces like the gun turrets, which rotate, so it was impossible to put air conditioning ductwork into them, and the engine rooms, which are just permanently so hot that there was no point in even trying to put air conditioning systems in. Both of those still have forced draft ventilation, original World War II type blower fans, but the Navy did the best that they could at that time. And I can't imagine if the ship was to, for some reason, be reactivated today, that they would find better ways to air condition than what they had. Because the air handler units that are on the ship in the 80s are pretty similar to the ones that we've seen on other ships, other more modern ships that we've been on lately. Many museum ships date to World War II or before, and so do not have significant air conditioning on board. So New Jersey actually has some of the best air conditioning of any of the museum ships I've been on. Still doesn't mean it's going to be 73 degrees like your house or your office, but she's got really great climate control compared to other museum ships. And you'll get to see that for yourself when you come out and visit. What temperature do you like to keep your air conditioner set at? Let us know in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to continue supporting the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find about us and our channel. Thanks for watching.